I don't need to say it, but Half-Life 2 is a great game. And you know what? We wanted to talk about it. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on GameRanx, 10 interesting Half-Life facts we thought you might not know. Starting off at number 10, a number of faces in this game are modeled after Valve employees, but probably the most interesting and notable one is Eli, who is modeled after a homeless man who was seen outside of Valve's offices. Two things come to mind when I think of this. A, that it's really cool, and B, I really hope they paid him something. I don't know if there's really any way to find out, but it'd be really nice to know if they had some sort of material impact on this man's life, other than a simple tribute to him in a video game. A person whose life has definitely changed since then is Robert Culp, the actor who portrayed Half-Life 2's villain, Dr. Wallace Breen. Unfortunately died a few years after the game came out. It was a very unfortunate death too. It happened because he fell. It serves to remind us the fragility of human life, something the game in a different way also does. Moving on to number 9, Half-Life 2 was released as an arcade game in Japan. Now what exactly that means is that an approximated version of the game, one that has been pared down, some of the features and some of the elements of the story aren't in the game. It's an arcade version, so it's slightly abbreviated, but not a whole lot. A lot of the events of the game are still, of course, in the game. Things like the flashlight and picking up certain items are not in the game on account there aren't enough keys, but there are additions for things that are actually not in the main game. For instance, a sniper rifle, which had actually been cut from the main game. People who have played the arcade version of this game have said things like the controls seem weird at first, but actually are pretty intuitive. And one thing that I think is actually fairly fun is that Valve apparently has 2 of them in their lobby, which are actually early versions of it. And at number 8, Half-Life 2 is being demade in Half-Life 1's engine. Now what does that mean? Well, the original Half-Life is, of course, a much lower resolution game with a lot more technical limitations than Half-Life 2. So in all honesty, the reason to do it is probably a challenge. Now, keeping in mind that a lot of the assets are not actually that downgraded, apparently the team working on this game had to make decisions as to whether they were actually going to down-res things a lot. And as it's turned out, they've made the game look a lot more like Half-Life 1 in the process, rather than just porting all of the assets, which would be technically possible, given that you would still be running the engine on a much more powerful computer. Still, it's really interesting to see on account the game doesn't really look a lot worse, despite being intentionally changed to look like the original game. Character models in particular are really made to look like the original game's character models, much lower resolution, and yet it weirdly enough holds up pretty well. Moving on to number 7, back in 2017, former Valve writer Mark Laidlaw released a synopsis for the series that had been unfinished that we all know as Half-Life. Basically, Half-Life Episode 3's plot summary. Well, last year it had been quite a while since then, and people wanted there to be that. So you know what people went ahead and did? Started making a game based on that summary called Project Borealis. The game is actually pretty promising. Rather than using the Source engine, they're building it in Unreal, which is actually probably a good choice. Unreal is, of course, a relatively easy-to-use engine that can give you pretty damn good graphics. And let's just be frank here, they're still kicking, they're still doing their work. The last update was in June, and it's pretty promising, honestly. Of course, we do have to understand it is based on the outline Mark Laidlaw posted, so we don't know exactly how closely it will be sticking to it, what it's going to be taking from it, but honestly, it looks pretty cool. They've integrated a lot of the weapons, they've integrated the look pretty well. It's of course very early days, but it's exciting and it looks great, especially for a fan project. Moving on to number 6, there's some pretty cool stuff you can learn about the voice cast of this game. Probably the biggest one, however, is that Robin Williams was actually very interested in voicing the Vortigaunts. He was apparently a very big fan of Valve, actually, having went to E3 the year they announced Half-Life 2 and approached them about how cool it was. And apparently the only reason he didn't do it was that he wasn't able to at the time. He was tied up due to scheduling reasons, which sucks. That would have been cool. However, the person who actually did eventually do the Vortigaunts was Lou Gossett Jr., who played Chappie in Iron Eagle, if you have ever heard of that film. More fun stuff involving the voice cast is that the actor who played Eli Vance was also the voice actor for Rafiki in the original Lion King. His name was Robert Guillaume, and unfortunately he died in 2017. But man, that guy had a cool voice. There's actually a lot of pretty well-known talent in the voice cast. For instance, Merle Dandridge, who played Alex Vance's voice, is a Broadway musical actress who is in Rent, Spam-A-Lot, Jesus Christ Superstar, and other very large Broadway productions. And even more talent fills out that roster if you're interested in looking further. Moving on to number 5, there is a phenomenal mod called M-Mod that was released near the very end of last year that reworks gunplay, overhauls visuals a bit, actually reworks some audio effects even, and also makes the AI in the game a little bit more, well, challenging to say the least. In a lot of ways, this mod modernizes some of the gunplay. It feels a lot different, and although maybe visually it may be a little bit harder to understand exactly how different it feels, if you take it for a spin, it's lovingly made in a manner that the original developers probably would have done. I'm not really sure what to say about Valve at this point in time, but way back, I feel like this would have been something that they'd endorse. Seriously, try it. It will leave you wanting so much more Half-Life. And at number 4, did you know that Gordon Freeman was actually designed by Chuck Jones and Dehaba Eng? Now, please forgive me for not saying that name right. I'm 100% sure I'm saying it wrong. But Eng is the person who ultimately created the in-game model for Half-Life 2. The model itself is actually a combination of several Valve employees, for instance, David Sparer, Eric Kirchmer, Greg Coomer, and Kelly Bailey. Gordon Freeman's name was originally Dyson Poincaré, which was a combination of philosopher Freeman Dyson and mathematician Henry Poincaré. And if I'm saying that name wrong, again, my apologies. I am not French, for instance. Gordon Freeman doesn't talk, but he's regarded one of the coolest protagonists of all time. And part of it is just that he's a normal scientist dude who ends up being an action hero. We've seen that a lot since Gordon Freeman, but when Gordon Freeman first came out, it was different. Moving on to number 3, the World War Z developer, who has also made remakes of Quake, Halo, and actually made a pretty good game in World War Z, approached Gabe Newell after they completed the Master Chief Collection and said, I would like to be able to remake Half-Life 2. He said, and I'm quoting this, "That's all I want to do. I won't charge you anything for it. I'll do a rev share, and it doesn't even need to be a big rev share. I just really want to do it because I love that game so much." Newell actually declined it, saying if they ever remade it, they would want to do it internally, which is actually the wrong way to go about remaking any of their games. The Black Mesa developers did it as a mod first, and they liked it so much they let them do a full remake of the game. But that also does indicate an entirely different approach that a major company probably couldn't take. Black Mesa is fantastic, by the way, and I would love to see someone totally redo Half-Life 2 as well as the 2 episodic games. That would be really neat. And at number 2, some absolute genius, a Reddit user by the name of Terrible Mayo, came up with this bizarre thing about the City 17 logo. If you split the logo into 6 sections and use the smallest segment as a measurement, then you end up with a sum of 17 segments. Which City 17 segments? I don't know how they came up with this. I mean, I get it, there's 17 segments, of course. That's an obvious connection. But I do not understand how on earth someone thought to do this. This person's so clearly smarter than me. And it's someone who obviously just had to have been sitting there staring at the City 17 logo saying, what is this? What does this mean? And that's something that I've never even thought to do. So, Terrible Mayo, if you're out there and you hear this, you're great. And finally, at number 1, the story told in cut content is a lot more bleak than the one that we got. And here's the thing, the one we got's pretty bleak. Given we don't have the end of the story at all, yes, we do have the sort of hypothetical end of story from the writer, but there's no guarantee that's the way they would have gone. And the reason there's no guarantee is because if you look at all this cut content, it's a different game. People wear gas masks because the Earth is no longer inhabitable. The air is so toxic from the Combine's stripping of the Earth, they need oxygen. The Combine of Half-Life 2's victory is pretty extensive, but it's a total victory. You are a rebellion in the unreleased version, with the unreleased content. There's also a large number of characters that just never were in the game, including characters that were randomly seemingly related or unrelated or have totally different roles that were co-opted by other characters or, for that matter, were leading rebellions. There's too much to talk about in a video that isn't specifically about cut content, but it's a rabbit hole you really should go down if you enjoy these sort of hypotheticals and changes and love learning about the sort of living process that is game development. Couple of quick bonus points for you. This is one that is maybe a little bit more widely known, but when you shine a flashlight at the hunters, their eyes dilate. And we bring that up because it's not the most noticeable thing in the world, but a lot of people have done it, and it's a cool detail that we like talking about here. And the last thing we want to talk about is that a few weeks ago, they fixed the blinking problem. NPCs in this game didn't blink for like a decade because of a bug that arose during patching once. And they finally fixed it. Valve finally was like, actually, here you go. What's your favorite element of Half-Life? Would you like to see a sequel? I know the answer is probably yes. I would too. Let's commiserate in the comments, though. If you like this video, click like. And if you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. So click subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification bell. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on GameRanx.